For over a decade, I shopped and worked at my local comic shop. One of the best parts about hanging out there was comparing notes on what I was reading with folks who shared my passion for comics. My comic shop is gone now, but we can still hold on to the magic of that in-store discussion. This is My Comic Shop Book Club. Welcome to My Comic Shop Book Club. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the Brian K. Vaughan Tony Harris series Ex Machina is novelist ROB HART.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for doing this. I won't lie, you are the biggest name guest that I've had so far. This is quite exciting here for My Comic Shop
God.
Book Club.
God, I hope that's not true. No one knows who I am.
No, well, you are a true novelist. Your book, The Warehouse, was optioned by Ron Howard's Imagine Entertainment. I know you're working on a new novel at the moment, correct?
Yes. Well, technically, it's kind of done now. It's called Paradox Hotel, and it's about time travel, which in retrospect, now that it's done, I feel a little bit better about it. When I was actually writing it, I really regretted writing about time travel because I almost gave me and my editor a brain aneurysm. But yeah, no, it's a fun one. It's going to come out next year. It's being developed for TV, and things are just moving along. So
that's really exciting. No, congratulations. So you and I met, it was at least 2 years ago now. I think it was around the time The Warehouse was coming out.
yeah, I was trying to figure that out because it's like it was a while ago, and it's really hard to judge time right now because we live in sort of like this strange like liminal space of like nothing matters anymore. But yeah, it was at the library festival. It was up in Connecticut, and it was the Westport Library, right?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
their big
yeah.
festival, and I moderated. You were one of their guests, and I moderated a panel with you, Image Comics writer Sebastian Gerner, and legendary comics creator Paul Kupperberg.
Yeah.
It was the three of you guys, and we had a great chat. It was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, it was a super fun panel. It was a fun event. I was really bummed when yeah, I guess it was 2 years ago because last year they were supposed to do it and I was going to do it again and it turned into like an online only thing. So and I still did like the online portion of it, which was fun, but I'm hoping to get up there again at some point because it was a nice festival.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm glad that we kept in touch, and I was able to wrangle you to do this. I sent you a few options of books to pick, and I included Ex Machina in this, and you immediately jumped at that. I'm
Yeah.
assuming, let me just say this though, right up front for our audience. I'm assuming people who are listening or watching as we discuss this have read the series or don't mind spoilers. There will be spoilers for the book here. I just want to put that out there in case anyone hasn't read it. I don't want to ruin that experience for them. So just a heads up on that. But I gave you a list of a few things, and I know you said you could do Why the Last Man all day long, which is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah.
But this Ex Machina emerged as the winner for you.
And I'm glad it did because as I was reading it, I'm like, man, like I don't even know if this series got the due that it deserved. It was real good. And part of it was really personal for me because and I guess for people who don't know, like the premise of the comic is that it's this guy who like he lives in a world where superheroes are still like he lives in our world where like there are comic books, but there are no superheroes. And then he gets these superpowers where he can like talk to machines and, you know, it really explores the reality of what it would be like being a superhero in the real world. And then he eventually gets into politics and becomes the mayor of New York City. And, you know, at the time that I started reading it, I was working in City Hall. I was the communications director for a New York City councilman. So I was reading this series and I'm like, oh man, like Vaughn did his homework, like it was pretty accurate and pretty on point. And also just like a fun, weird, smart series about like, the kind of the way power is this weird fluid dynamic thing and that ultimately corrupts people.
Very much so. And that's what I was so curious that was going to be my main question. And even though I don't have the experience that you have reading it, I mean, it felt very authentic. And that was going to be my question for you. It's like, did it feel true to life as you were reading this, given your background?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, politics are a complicated thing, especially, so this guy is the mayor of New York City. And New York City is like a really kind of unique place because, it's only a city. You can only do the mayor only has so much power. Like there's a lot of legislative power rests at the state level, and then a lot of policy making power rests at the federal level, and the federal level kind of supersedes everything. Um, but at the same time, when you're mayor of New York City, you're mayor of the biggest city in the world, and arguably one of the most influential cities in the world. So, which is why so many New York City mayors like are able to build these national profiles where, you can go to other parts of the country and like I can't name the mayor of San Francisco, but probably a lot of people in San Francisco can name the mayor in New York. Um, and so it was fun to kind of watch how that like Vaughn really was playing with the dynamic in a very smart way because I mean he was obviously using the series as kind of like an outlet to kind of talk about his own sort of political ideas, which was basically like trying to come down a little bit more in the middle and get away from like the noise on either side. Um, but it always had this really smart sense of the early on the series addresses gay marriage, and I guess it would have been like 2002 or 2003 at that point when like the story is taking place. And yeah, there was something similar in New York City where they wanted to issue marriage licenses to gay couples here, but they couldn't because the state law says you can't, federal law says you can't. So even if you change the city law, it technically doesn't make a difference. Like you can, but the state or the feds can just come in and take them away. So it's like this weird interplay of how effective you can be and like how you can actually address important issues. And yeah, so the government nerd in me was having a really good time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally get it. And, that was one of the fascinating things, reading this in almost really every arc, there's some, major issue that's tackled in the context of the story. And, whether it's freedom of speech or gay marriage, legalization of marijuana, gun violence, police shooting, like so many things come into play. And virtually everything is still relevant, today. And so it was really interesting to kind of go back and read something that came out, well over a decade ago and see how it's all still playing out.
Yeah, yeah, and especially in the context of like, and now, gay marriage is legal. So it's like, okay, cool. Like this is wow, like this really used to be very different. Like you almost kind of forget sometimes. And yeah, it was interesting. Like I feel like I remember thinking this very clearly when I was reading it the first time around when it came out, which was like Vaughn's definitely like got a hook up with someone on the inside. Like he's definitely talking to someone who like works in the administration and is because like I'm sure like obviously Vaughn is a brilliant writer. Like we could sit here all day and like talk about his CV and how great it is. But yeah, no, he put in his research time on that because he there were a few things that maybe were like probably twisted a little bit just for storytelling's sake, but for the most part, he pretty much nailed it.
Yeah, totally. And so again, you read it. I'm always curious, when I do these book club episodes, to find out, how my guest first experienced it, and then what the experience was like upon reread. Sometimes it changes for better or worse. So you read it as it was coming out, and then had you revisited it in the time since, or was this your first reread in a while?
Yeah, no, this is my first reread. I don't reread a lot of stuff, and usually I like there to be a lot of distance because I always feel like you know I've got too much new stuff to read and too much new stuff to go after. So sometimes when I'm like rereading something or rewatching a movie, I kind of feel like okay, I could be dedicating this time to something new. But then like it's been a very long time since I read it, so it was like okay, cool. Like I kind of forget some of the things that were in here, and so this is exciting. And I get and it gets weird. Man, it's a weird series. Like once it starts getting to like the interdimensional stuff, like towards like the back third. And I kind of had like vague recollections of it, but I guess I was a little surprised. I thought that that sort of weird interdimensional plot thing was a little bit clearer. And as I was rereading it, I was like, wow, Vaughn really did hold a lot of that back and just kind of is letting the reader fill in the gaps, which I respect. Even though part of me kind of wishes we had gotten a little bit more of that, because I'm just a fan of chaos. I'm like, lean into the weird. Let me see more of that weird like spider robot thing.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right though. It does get really weird. And then that last arc in particular, it really leans into, the sci-fi side. And it is a departure from a lot of, what came previous in the series. My experience was a little bit different. I was first introduced to Vaughn's work with Why the Last Man.
Yeah.
And I read that in trade as it was coming out. Like I got into that pretty early on. I wasn't too far behind, and I caught up in the trades, and I kept going, and I loved it. It is, one of my all-time favorite comic book series. And so when he started this, I was very interested, and I read, I want to say the first two, maybe three trades when they first came out, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. It became one of those things where the next trade came out, and it was like, all right, I'll get to it. And then the following trade came out, and it's like, all right, I got a couple trades, I'll catch up. And it just kept building and building. And for years now, over a decade, I've had this 10-volume set on my shelf, and I just never got to it. And that's one of the reasons why I've been doing this podcast, is to motivate myself to finally read. So I was reading most of this for the first time.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, I got to tell you, so overall, I really enjoyed it thoroughly. I want to unpack the ending a little bit, because I have somewhat mixed feelings about that. But overall,
yeah,
I enjoyed it. And I think the biggest compliment that I can pay it is that I don't know what comic book wise I've read recently that I read like as voraciously as this. I mean, if not for the fact that we were talking off mic, I have a young son and, working from home, like if not for that, I think I would have just blown through this in a day. I mean, it would just keep me on the edge of my seat.
And the crazy thing about it is it's dense storytelling. Like it could get really dense. You've got a lot of weird sci-fi stuff. You've got a lot of flashbacks. You've got a lot of public policy. And I remember like you pinged me about this like a week and a half ago, just reminding me of it. And like I had it on my calendar and I knew it was coming up, but I was like, oh man, like I gotta pull these down and I gotta reread them now, like just so I'm prepped. And I remember taking them down and looking at it, and it's like 10 fairly thick volumes. And I was like, okay, man, like I'll probably be able to get through this. Like hopefully I can. And yeah, I think I nailed it in like 2 or 3 days, because I was like, oh yeah, these go down quick. And yeah, man, just such sort of good fast reads.
Yeah, and I really, that is a testament to the writing and the art as well. But yeah, despite the fact that you do have this dense, policy related subject matter, it really moves. You mentioned the flashbacks. I think the flashbacks to our protagonists' superhero days, pre-mayoral days, I think that really does help with the rhythm and the flow of this. It kind of breaks it up, and as a comic book fan, I guess it gives you a little bit of that action that you might crave. Though I'll be honest, it was interesting to fill in his backstory for sure. But I was genuinely like enthralled by the political side of all of this. And that's why I'm actually glad that I read it now. I know I appreciated it more now at this point in my life, after what we've been seeing over the past few years. Like it definitely resonated with me in a way that, when I was in high school and college, it would have, but not as much as it did now.
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's an interesting lens to look at it through, because it's very much a snapshot of like the post 9/11 world, and now we're living in like the post Trump era, which is just so completely different. And yeah, just it's man, it feels like light years away from where we were when it first came out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so it started in, I think it was 2003 or 2004. So we were a couple of years, out from 9/11. But, of course that's our jumping off point in the story. And it really takes you back, for me, at least in a couple of respects, I guess, to 9/11 itself. And then also to those couple of years later when I was first starting to read this story. And for me as a comics reader, that was a time in my journey where I was really starting to expand my horizons and read more stuff. I'm wearing my Superman sweatshirt. I love Superman. I love my traditional superhero stuff. But like that was when I was really starting to see what comics could really do. And so this really kind of hit for me in a couple of respects. But I got to say, and I want to get your take on this. I mean, a story like this that's so rooted in a specific time, right? The risk is that it could feel dated when you read it now, but I mean, I don't know. It just felt more like like a snapshot of that time, but not in a
Yeah.
dated way. What about you?
Yeah. You know, and just digging into the 9/11 thing for a second. I mean, I had like a fairly visceral reaction to the first issue when I read it. And you know, for anyone who hasn't read it, the premise is that this guy, you know, the main character Mitchell 100, he was a superhero named the Great Machine, and he can talk to machines. And he had agreed to stop being a superhero, or really just like a vigilante, and like made a deal with like the government to avoid prosecution. And then he suits up one last time on 9/11 and ends up saving, like he diverts one of the planes, so one of the buildings is still standing at the end of the comic. And I mean, as a born and raised New Yorker, who's, you know, my dad's a New York City firefighter, and he went down there that day, and luckily he got there like just as the towers were coming down, and he was okay. But like, I just remember reading that and being like, Jesus, that's intense. And so like I can actually appreciate it a little bit more now for what it was trying to do. It was a little hard to separate myself from that part of it when I first read it. And now looking at it with a lot of distance, I think I can appreciate a little bit more. I can get over that feeling of like shock, that not that Vaughn was really going for shock value. I mean, I guess it kind of is a shock value thing. But yeah, no, the lens felt very different. It felt easier to process and to understand at this point, given the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I didn't know, of the personal connection. I mean, obviously, I know, you've been a New Yorker, but that's yeah. I mean, I can only imagine. And yeah, so the big reveal right at the end of the first issue is that this is an altered, an alternate reality here, separate from our world. Though most of the series is really tracks otherwise, but yeah, that Mitchell was able to save one of the towers on 9/11. That's how we end the first issue, and it's like this huge moment that's really our jumping off point. Lets us know, kind of the world we're working in, and accounts for how he was able to really pull ahead in the election despite being this, dark horse, candidate who had this failed career as a vigilante. So yeah, I mean, it really pulls you into that time for sure. I mean, I guess the other thing too is that I found interesting is, this past career as a superhero. We've had instances, I don't know if you read, there was a Green Arrow storyline a few years ago where Oliver Queen becomes mayor. And then, of course, they did something similar in the television show as well. So, we've had other instances of, hero turned politician, but it's still, in those cases at least, like it's still a superhero book. It's like he's still going to be putting on the costume, and it's only going to last so long. Like this, I thought was so interesting because like you get to follow him over the course of a full 4-year term in as real
Yeah.
world a scenario as possible.
Yeah, and what's really cool is that it shows that shared DNA between superheroes and politicians, because if you think about it, it's someone who stands up and decides like, I know how to make decisions better than the rest of you. Like I believe that I am an exceptional individual who can make, who can make judgment calls that are going to save people, and who doesn't always have to follow the rules, because I can rewrite the rules if I want to. And because it's just, yeah, just watching that interplay between the two. And as I was reading it, I'm like, might this be sort of like the heir apparent to Watchmen, in the sense that it's like it's really examining those power dynamics of like, because I think Moore was going after like sort of the inherent fascism of superheroes, and this kind of goes toward that sort of, maybe not fascism, but this idea that it's like, someone's deciding they know better for you than you do. And how do you trust them with that kind of power ultimately? Because we see over the course of the series, Mitchell 100 seems like a really cool guy in the beginning, and then you get to the end and you realize like, wait, nope, he did a lot of bad things, or was sort of started doing bad things because he thought it was okay, like he could get away with it because he was the kind of person who like didn't have to listen to the rules.
Right. Yeah, so I have to share with you that a dear friend of mine, Mike, and he's been on my other podcast. He's going to be coming on this show in a couple of episodes. We're going to do a 2-episode deep dive into Grant Morrison's new X-Men. He's a huge
Okay.
Morrison guy. You would get along.
Yeah.
And he and I have spoken about this series a couple of times over the years, and definitely when I announced that I was doing this. So I just want to share his take on this because it might be a decent jumping off point for us. He was so into this series as it was coming out. The first page of original art that he ever bought was a page from the series. His wife is a graphic designer, and she designed a tattoo. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was an Ex Machina related tattoo that he was going to get. He was going to get it, but he was so put off by the final issue that it soured him on the series and on the writer. Sad to say. I don't know. I feel like because we've been texting now, and I texted him when I finished reading last night, and I don't know. I think he might be open to revisiting it, and he himself was like, it was a different time in my life when I read it, and I was reading it as it came out. He's like, I might feel differently now reading the whole thing in one shot at this point in my life. So I think he might be willing to give it a second try. But the ending, I guess I had some mixed feelings as well. How did you feel about the way that the series ends?
Yeah, and I've been thinking about that too, because so the series ends with him, and then as the series is going on, he's talking about like maybe wanting to run for president and wanting to do something beyond being mayor of New York, which is what most mayors of New York do. Like most of them run for president. And on like the final page, you find out that he ended up becoming vice president, and John McCain was president, and yeah. So here's my theory. Vaughan really seemed to be going for a sort of moderate. I don't want to say moderate, because moderate is sometimes like a stand-in for sort of toothless. I think he wanted to go for sort of like a realistic take, like to try to like take the dogma and some of the nonsense out of these arguments and come at it from a rational point of view. I think that when you look at the series, because you got to figure the like I'm gonna do this now just because like now I'm curious like when the last issue of this actually came out, because I feel like the way people felt about John McCain was really different than what he turned into when he was a presidential candidate. This was before that, when he was like the maverick who like stood up and did the right thing regardless of whether or not his party was behind him, which was kind of a fiction anyway. Like he didn't do it as much as people kind of made it seem like he did. But I think what Vaughan was doing was he was looking for that sort of, maybe he thought that McCain was sort of like that compromise politician of someone who was like a Republican, but not like a lunatic, like we want to kill poor people and give everyone guns Republican. And maybe to him that kind of seemed like a compromise sort of place to end up, and something a little bit more reasonable for Mitchell to end up in, because even though a lot of New York City mayors have run for president, they haven't always had success doing it. So it makes a little bit more. There's a longer conversation about how like technically a independent or Democrat from New York City is not a great ticket balancer, but I'm not going to get into the weeds on this. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not finding a good answer on this, but regardless, the point remains is that I think that like he was keying into something about McCain that may have been true then that wasn't necessarily true, especially through the lens of looking at it now.
That makes sense, and I think like I said, I had some mixed feelings about it, and I think in part it was my own fault. I think I had too much expectation going into the final issue, and I won't blame Mike, but that was part of it. He he had prepped me. He was like, "There's this ending," and I was like, "Oh my god!" So I think that was part of it where I went in, and I don't know what I was expecting. I just was bracing myself. And over the years, I also don't know how I managed to avoid getting spoiled on this over all these years. I mean, I remember when the final issue came out and seeing headlines like on Newsarama and whatever, and I guess I was just good about avoiding it, and I didn't overhear anything at the comic shop, and I was able to remain unspoiled all these years. But I think I went in, expecting this mind-blowing ending, and your point is well taken. I think at the time, that final page reveal and the title of Vice was probably like, oh my God. Today, it just didn't, yeah, I don't know. It didn't have that effect on me so much. Again, it didn't ruin my enjoyment of the series. But it didn't, because, I mean, you tell me, right? Because you read it as it was coming out. I mean, I would imagine at the time, I mean, did the ending feel to you the way the end of the first issue did? Like when you see that he saved the tower, like that's sort of like, whoa,
It was definitely a shock, and I remember having like really mixed feelings and kind of not liking the ending when I first read it, and being a little bit more open to it this time. And it's funny, like even as we're talking about it, like it's just trying to kind of like suss out the meaning of it. I mean, at the same time, like Mitchell basically makes a full on heel turn by like the end of the series.
yeah.
I mean, he kills Kremlin. He, takes Bradbury, who is like, obviously a guy who's like down on his luck, but like his lifelong best friend, and kind of like kicks him out and is like, you're a danger to my political career now. Like he rigged the election. He did all these terrible things, and so yeah, like maybe he is where he belongs. Like maybe that was Vaughan saying like, yeah, of course this is the guy who's going to go over to the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is the party of, fuck you, I got mine. So it's yeah, I don't know. Now I want to ask Vaughan. If I ever run into him, I'm going to ask him. Be like, what was the deal with that?
Let's come back to that in a second. Let's just do a
Yeah.
quick commercial break. And let me say, I know we're still, we're only 25 minutes into our episode here. And I know we're already talking about the ending of the series, but I think it's worth doing that, because I think, kind of knowing where the character ends up and then kind of looking back on what came before and seeing like, okay, does this track? And I think it does. But anyway, let's take a quick commercial break, and then we'll come right back. Movie lovers should check out this family of film festivals: the Brightside Tavern Film Festival in Jersey City, the Hang On to Your Shorts Film Festival in Asbury Park, and the Point Lookout Film Festival on Long Island. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Also, be sure to listen to the podcasts hosted by the festival's organizer, CJ Cullen. You can find the official Hang On to Your Shorts podcast, as well as the Cullen on Film podcast, via a shared universe network. And we're back. I don't want to forget, and I don't want to leave this to the very end of the episode. For people who want to check out your work, follow you on social media, where's the best place to find you and your work?
Sure. I'm at robwhart.com on the web. On Twitter, same thing, Rob W. Hart. I'm Rob W. Hart 1 on Instagram, because I guess someone got there before me. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. And my books are available on like, Amazon or other non-evil book selling operations. So yeah.
Yeah.
You were just saying something that was really interesting, and so now I've got a question for you. Do you watch like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul?
They're on the list, but I haven't.
Oh, they're on the list.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
All right.
But my wife and I just did Sopranos. I don't know if that would be in line with what you're thinking, but we did that finally after many years.
Well, okay. So I won't get too deeply into why I asked, but still, like there's a question that I've been thinking about with Mitchell is, was Mitchell a good person who was corrupted by power, or was he always a corrupt person who the power brought it out of him? Like, what's your sense of him?
That's what I've been trying to wrap my head around too. I guess I don't know that I have a great answer on that. We see him, this is, I think, what's so fascinating about the portrait that this series paints of him, because we are following him, obviously in the present day in his capacity as mayor of New York. Every issue has a flashback to his time as the Great Machine, this costumed vigilante who had a short-lived, failed career. And oftentimes, and again, I know you know this, but for our audience, in almost every instance, there's some either thematic or plot point tie-in between the flashbacks and what's going on, right? Like in the arc about the legalization of marijuana, in the flashbacks, we have this multi-issue runner about him trying to tackle this pot dealer. So you kind of see it play out that way, and then we do also get flashbacks to even earlier points in his life and his upbringing. We see some key moments with his mother and with his friends. We spend some time at the comic shop. The formation of this bond with Kremlin, who, as you said, ultimately he'll go on to kill. It's like we see him at these various points, and I feel like he remains, despite all the time we spend with him and all those different timelines, he remains an enigma in a lot of ways. And even when we're dealing with all of those, the political issues that we were talking about, he is often, it's becomes a recurring theme, right? Like that he doesn't often reveal what he personally thinks about a lot of this. And sometimes we'll get some insight, like when we see him smoke up at the end of the smoke arc.
Yeah.
We see these moments as early as the first arc, or the first issue even, when, one of the governor's underlings tries to blackmail him with the evidence that will come back later in the story about how he rigged the election. And we don't get that information at that point, but we see the way Mitchell responds, and he threatens to, turn off this gentleman's pacemaker. And so we see that darker side to him very early on. And that's juxtaposed with this heroism of, what he accomplished on 9/11. And I think that kind of lulls you into a false sense of security with the character. Like and this is a long answer, and I apologize, but I guess when I got to the end of the story, I didn't, when he turns his back on Bradbury at his lowest moment, because it'd be politically inconvenient for him, and when he kills Kremlin, it's like it tracked for me. I felt like from what we've seen or not seen of this guy, it made sense to me. Now, to your question, was he, just always a bad person? Did the power bring it out of him? That I'm a little more on the fence on. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I remember like really wondering that when I was originally reading the series, and then toward the end you find out that he rigged the election after doing this whole song and dance about like, I built this nullifier and I'm going to have like a UN, security official watching me, and I'm not going to use because the guy can control machines. You know, and you find out that like he created this device that Bradbury was taking around and like pretty clearly like swung the vote counts. And so yeah, it's like, oh wow, no, like he was willing to compromise way in the beginning, like before we got through any of this. And yeah, you're exactly right. Like you kind of get lulled into this false sense of security. And like you can kind of see like, okay, yeah, maybe the guy is compromising himself because he's just trying to operate in the world of politics. And you get to the end, you're like, oh no, like he engineered this. And
he's
it
a civil
definitely casts
engineer.
like,
He lived up
well,
to
yeah,
his career.
yeah, and it casts a very different light on like him and what he's done. And then you're kind of grappling with the fact that yes, this guy has done very thoughtful things. Like, of course, like he stood up and said, I don't care if it's illegal. I'm going to issue gay marriage licenses, like whatever. And then you get to the end, you're like, oh, but he rigged an election. That's not good, Um, yeah, it's weird, but again, I think it gets back to what I was talking about before with like, this idea that like superheroes and politicians are just like sort of inherently that there's something wrong there. I mean, this is now like it's funny. I was watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier today, and then the newest episode, and that question is really, really sort of like the big question of the episode is like, the very idea of creating a super soldier is so troubling, and they're having this conversation about how like well, it didn't corrupt Steve Rogers. It's like, right, but it corrupted everyone else. Like he's the exception to the rule. He's not an example of it.
I'm using that word literally correctly, literally just finished watching the episode you're talking about right before we sat down to do this. So I get what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, I guess all right, another possible theory. he gets his powers when this device in the water explodes, right? And it disfigures him, but then that gives him the ability to communicate with machines. And over the course of the series, I mean, he has these visions of this interdimensional world, and there are potentially people who are coming over from this world and leading an invasion. It's the whole thing. I mean, could we make an argument that he genuinely, truly believes he's the only one who can save the world from this, and so everything he's doing is justified? I mean, when I had this text exchange with my buddy who was, very, very put off by the ending, he seemed to feel like Mitchell's intentions were good, but I don't know that I land on that side. I don't know that I see that. What about you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think he kind of cares about this whole interdimensional thing. Like it pops up as an issue where sometimes you get people crossing over and he ends up having to like confront them, but he's never like, okay, like there's clearly this larger issue at play here, and now I need to go be a superhero and I need to fix it. He's kind of like, man, like I'm supposed to be at a fundraiser and you're messing things up for me. Like, go away. Like it always seems like it's like he's swatting away a gnat. Like this idea that like, the world is going to be invaded by like weird, terrifying looking interdimensional monsters. It's almost like he doesn't believe it, you know like he kind of does, but he kind of doesn't. But he doesn't give it like this deep level of import. Like it seems more like he's worried about where he's going to be standing at the end of it, not where the world's going to be standing at the end of it. And I guess maybe that's part of the key of figuring him out, is like, his potential run for president is more important than like making sure the world is still around for him to be president of when the time comes.
Right. Yeah, and just jumping back to that, all the interdimensional stuff. I know you mentioned earlier, and I agree. I mean, it does lean more into the sci-fi later on. And I know you said you would have taken even more of that. I'll be honest, I kind of felt the opposite. I would have been okay with less, and I didn't need, I mean, I don't know. I guess you had to at least offer something. Otherwise, I think that would put people off, right? Like if it just always remains this completely unanswered thing of like, where do the powers come from? What is this all about? I would have been okay without that, but I didn't mind it either.
Yeah, I mean, I like that he kind of that Vaughan kind of leaves a lot of it up to sort of interpretation, and he's not really explaining it to you. And there's a lot of concepts that get thrown out that don't get explained. And I'm a big fan of like, context clues and not spoon feeding things to a reader. It's like sometimes it's fun to make the reader work a little bit more, but that stuff was so weird and so bizarre that it's just like, I always want more of the weird, the bizarre.
Right. No, fair enough. And then you also mentioned before, if you ever run into Vaughan, you would have questions for him about the series. Have you ever met him?
No. Yeah, he's definitely high up on the list of people I would love to meet. I mean, I always like, so I've done a couple of Comic Cons now. I did Seattle, New York, and San Diego in the before times, and I've always got like this list of like people that I would love to try to track down if they're there. And then you get there and you realize that it's like, I'm going to hide my hotel room until someone needs me because, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Like,
right? Yeah, I know.
God, have you ever done San Diego?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unpleasant.
Yeah. No, I know. I have no arguments here. I've done it. Wait, how do I not know this? Two or three times? No, twice. Yeah, I think it was just twice. I've done New York a bunch, but yeah, I did San Diego a couple of times, and yeah, it was.
I mean, the New York one's not that bad. But yeah, man, like I just remember like it's like, oh man, my first San Diego Comic Con, and my publisher brought me out for it, and I'm like, they like the Penguin Random House has like a big booth with like a back seating area where like you can go and hang out, and they got like snacks and stuff, so it's super chill. And I was like, oh man, I'm gonna walk the floor a little bit, and I made it like 200 feet, and it's just like this crush of people that you're like this. I'm like, nope, going back to my little hidey hole at the booth. Like I'm done.
Yeah, it's an experience. I always say to people, if you're a real comic book fan and you just want to see what it's like, I mean, give it a shot, but it is very overwhelming. I mean, you get like a few days in, you definitely you've gotten your bearings and you have the lay of the land, and what seemed so like all consuming before, doesn't seem quite as overwhelming, but it's a lot. And I mean, the idea of being packed in with that many people, like I never liked that before. And especially now, like after what we've been through, it's like, I really have, I don't long to return to that, I guess is my point. I'm not like, oh, I can't wait till the next time I could be in that type of environment. A smaller show is something else.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm excited to get back out to like conferences and stuff, and I know that as soon as I get there, I'm gonna hate it and be like, oh man, why did I ever miss this? It's like the shine's gonna come off the apple real quick.
I hear you. I didn't really have an opportunity to have a conversation with Brian K. Vaughan, but I met him at a signing at Midtown Comics when
Okay.
his Vertigo graphic novel Pride of Baghdad came out. I'm holding up the Ex Machina trade because I got that signed, and I forgot that I had this signed. I knew I had the first volume of Y signed, and I knew I had Pride of Baghdad. And when I pulled the volume 1 of this off my shelf, I was like, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, I got that signed too." He was super nice. I mean, again, though, it was and you've been on the other side of the table. I mean, it was really just, a quick thing. I was like, I really like your work. Do you have another Vertigo series planned? And he was like, yeah, and that was about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be fascinating to talk to him. And the other thing that I was so interested to ask you as a writer yourself, I mean, and I know this is kind of a big question, whatever direction you want to take it in, feel free. But whether we're talking about, individual, scenes or sequences or storylines, or just sort of like big picture, how he approached the series, are there things from a writing perspective that really jumped out at you, and or that you were like, oh, like that's a Brian K. Vaughan thing right there?
You know, there were a lot of things about it that I really yeah, because I'm reading it in two ways. I'm reading it like as a comic book fan, but also like I'm reading it from sort of like a mechanical standpoint of like, how is this put together? Because I'm always fascinated by the shape of things and like what I can learn from it. And yeah, man, like Vaughn, like the thing I love about him is like he just writes these great distinctive characters, this great dialogue. The dialogue is fantastic. The way that he was able to like A, do his research, and then B, disseminate all that info in a way that was like really intelligent and really made sense and didn't bog down the story, which was in Why the Last Man a lot too, because like the sort of the weird intricacies of like what the world would be like if like all the men died and it was just women surviving. Like there were things that were popping up in the book that I was like, that's really clever. Like he sat down and he like that's a really interesting facet to look at the world like that. And yeah, just it's the way that he juggles all these different things, like the big ideas and the character work and the weird sci-fi stuff, and the pacing is always like really really good. Like the thing that I appreciated in the rereading was, I had thought those flashbacks were longer, but a lot of those flashbacks were only like a page or two.
Mm-hmm.
But they're giving you like a really good chunk and really sort of setting a really good stage for the issue, and they work as in a very episodic way, where it's like you're getting an overarching story, but you're getting sort of like a clearly contained issue each time. And yeah, man, he's so good. He makes me a little angry.
I know there are a few blurbs on the trade. I keep looking over at because I have my stack of trades right here. There are a few blurbs on various trades where comic book writers in particular say basically the same thing, where it's like, this book makes me mad, like at how good it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like too we got to take a second and we got to pay some due to the artwork here
Yes.
too, because like that was some really really nice work.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so Tony Harris, Tom Feister, J.D. Metler, the letterer or the colorist. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was, and it all worked so well together. It did feel like you said, episodic. I mean, this felt like a show, that you would see on, well, now these days on a streaming platform or like premium cable or something like that. I mean, it really,
Yeah.
It had that rhythm, and yeah, the art brought it to life in such a great way. I mean, very realistic, but it still captured the fun, and certainly when we get into like the more comic booky superhero side of it, I thought it really balanced both of those well.
It did. and it certainly helped to have like to be able to break it up a lot of times with like the little flashback scenes, where then you've got like this when it gets like really weird, and you can tell that they were having a really good time with it. But the thing that really struck me was that like a lot of the series is just people standing in rooms talking, you know, and and it's still it has a feeling of movement to it, and it feels dynamic, and you don't feel like you're just trying to tread through dialogue as like people stand in a room. And yeah, it just really comes together very nicely.
Yeah, very well, directed in a sense. And yeah, you're right. I mean, a book like this, it's true. The dialogue is fantastic, right? And it really pulls you in. But at the same time, you do still potentially run that risk of getting bogged down in all the talking heads. But that never happens in
Yeah.
this book. Which is really cool. What did you think of the towards the end of the series, their meta issue where Vaughan and Harris are comic creators meeting 100 to do a comic book about him?
I actually, and I wanted to circle back to that, so I'm glad that you did. That is something like when you get meta, man, like you really got to nail that, and I really think that they nailed it. Like, because and they obviously like they got some fun jokes in there about being late for meetings and being unreliable and all this goofy stuff. But it was also, I think it served the series well because it was basically Vaughn explaining why he wrote it. And you can feel how sort of deeply personal it was to him, and kind of like the pain and the fear and the healing that it was coming out of. And I think it really gave a nice perspective to it, and it framed it really nicely. And then I love that little joke at the end where it seems like they don't get the job, because is that like a Jim Lee splash page?
Yeah, and actually, in the credits of the trade, there's a special thanks to Garth Ennis and Jim Lee for their contributions to issue 40 or 41. So I think those two
Okay.
pages were with those guys. Yeah,
Yeah, which and I remember looking for that, and I was reading it really late at night. And I think I just got tired and gave up. But I was like, this looks like a Jim Lee drawing. And so yeah, I guess the story is that like he thinks Vaughn and Harris think they got the job, and then it goes to Garth Ennis
yeah,
and Jim Lee. And yeah, I remember like kind of studying it, and I'm like, where like just where's the credit on this? I need to verify this is Jim Lee. No, I'm tired. I'm going to sleep. Um, but yeah, no, it was I appreciated that part of it too. Like he was willing to kind of like poke a little bit of fun at himself at the same time that he was willing to sort of get kind of like deep and introspective on it. So yeah, I think he pulled that off.
yeah. It was fun. Did I know that they did that? I think I only knew it from the trade paperback, the little blurb in the
Yeah.
back that is the synopsis mentioned that. But I still didn't. I didn't realize the extent that it would be like a whole issue with that.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun, and it was cool to see the way Vaughn used comics in this story, right? Like you said, I mean, we're in a version of the real world, right? So they know the comic book characters the same way we do, and why they're written and drawn by the same people as well. And they hang out at their local comic shop and all that stuff. And it was fun. It was cool when they would, Mitchell in particular, would make a comic book reference, and of course the other cast of characters would react the way people in our lives have probably reacted when we mentioned comic book stuff. Like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that was part of the fun of reading the series, was reading a series that just felt so grounded, because I guess we're especially as comic book readers, we're so used to these big giant sort of sprawling worlds with all these characters, and this was just very sort of pared down to like, nope, just one superhero who ever existed for all time, and he's in the real world, and he knows who Clark Kent is. And yeah, it was just it just puts the entire it's fun because it just puts comic books in general into a new perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciated that a lot. And I mean, yeah, and it also, yeah, right, it explains why he would put on a costume in the first place when he gets these powers. It's like, well, I grew
Yeah.
up reading I grew up reading comics, so it makes sense.
Yeah, and
Uh
it's also like super grounded, and he kind of sucks at it, you
yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Because like yeah, like he can talk to machines, and he's got this ability to like build like really advanced technology. Like he can build like a stun gun, he can build a jetpack, but like the human body is not really sort of made there was like he rescues someone, but like he can only carry one person at a time because he's not strong enough, and he crashes through a window and it looks super cool, and then he ends up with like a piece of glass in his arm, and it's like, yeah, being a superhero is not a super easy thing, and I appreciated that level of reality and that level of groundedness to it.
Yeah, you're right. There were a lot of cool touches like that. I remember, there was an instance where, he shows up for a rescue and he's explaining, what he can do or how his powers work. And the people, either they can't hear him or they're like, well, like, I don't care. Like, just help us. Stuff like that. Or when he was rescuing the family and he was saving the mother. I think that might've been the scene you were talking about. It was like, I can only carry one at a time, but he starts to carry the mother first. She's like, what are you doing? Like, go get my kids. So to see him that inept, but again, I really do think that and I don't know what other people's take on that is as they're watching those flashbacks unfold. But yeah, I do think it makes him seem endearing. And again, like lulls you into this false sense of security about who this guy really is.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like he's very endearing. It's this guy who like, he wants to do the right thing, and he's got this kind of like weird quirky power, and he's doing the best he can with it and just not doing the best job. But he's trying, and yeah, like and then you see him as the series goes on, and it's like, oh, you've made a lot of bad decisions.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I don't know if there's something earlier that you would pinpoint, but I think, yeah, when we find out that he had Bradbury bring those devices to a number of polling places on election day, and that he only won, not in a landslide, but like 20,000 votes. That was really certainly for me reading that, was a big turning point as far as like, okay, like this is not, again, even though you knew he was capable of some darker choices and dealings, but to get that piece of information, that was a huge turning point.
Yeah. No, it was, man, yeah, it's a complicated series, and then yeah, like you're looking at him swinging an election in a period where everyone's assuming that an election got swung that didn't, and that wasn't swung, and yeah, so it's like oddly like less relevant and more relevant at the same time.
Yeah, totally. And I guess then sort of the spiritual successor to that moment, when he's fighting Suzanne's former potential love interest. I guess that's another conversation. But when she's taken over by the other white power, and she can control, not white power, that's something else.
I see.
The energy.
Yes.
And she can make people do what she wants. But she has that nullifier that Mitchell had given, one to Bradbury and one to Kremlin, and it was like, this will shut down my powers if I ever get out of control, if you ever need to. And she uses it and nothing happens, and he has that moment where he's like, I'm a politician, I lie, and he throws her into the interdimensional rift, and it was like, damn, this guy.
Yeah, man, and that's the thing, man. It's like power corrupts, and it's like, but are those who seek power inherently corrupt? Yeah, it's a lot to chew on, which, and again, it's why I kind of feel like this is a series that's really worth revisiting, and it's worth people checking out, because it's like it really reframes a lot of these themes about, again, like who watches the Watchmen, like who, like people have this power, like, how can you trust people to be responsible with it? How can you trust people to do the right thing? Like, will people do the right thing? And yeah, it's very meaty.
Yeah, there's there was the arc where Mitchell goes off the grid to rescue his mother, right, from the bad situation she's in, elsewhere. Was it New Mexico or I
something like that,
right? And they were talking about his father or something. But she has this line where she's like, 30 chapters of good deeds doesn't tell a man's whole story. And here we have 50 plus chapters, right? So the series ran 50 issues plus like a handful of specials. So not too far off from what she was saying, but kind of plays into that, right? Like we do see all these instances of him doing, again, like with gay marriage, it's like, wow, like he's making a progressive choice here, so, and there are all these moments. And of course, what he did on 9/11, but it's like, yeah, that's not he's not only that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, and there's also like some really sort of again like he does some really good things. Like the KKK issue is really really that's a big standout because it's
Yeah.
like this idea that like the KKK wants to march, but like they're arguing that they can march in masks because like there are laws about what you can and cannot do in public demonstrations while masked, and their argument is like, well, the mayor had a mask on and did his thing, so we can wear our masks and do our thing, and it's like, yeah, like kind of forcing him to kind of contend with that whole being a superhero and being a vigilante thing and like what that plays out as over time. And yeah, it's fascinating. And again, like it's a testament to Vaughn for like really taking these issues and kind of like really needling down on them and really digging deep on them because like it'd be really easy to write like a superhero as politician thing and have it be like kind of like a surface read. And this is just like such a deeply intense dive into this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I know he really does give you a lot to chew on. And, it's the structure of most of these arcs is that you do still have a villain of the week or, a villain of the arc, right? So you are still contending with that. And often that throws a wrench in the works of whatever issue they happen to be, dealing with at the moment. But it still doesn't get glossed over. And, yeah, I mean, the fact that he did take the time to go as deep as he did, really, really very strong. The one thing I wanted, well, a few things I wanted to ask you, but, like I said before, in a lot of instances, Mitchell, the character, doesn't really share his true feelings on a lot. Like he really keeps a lot close to his sexual orientation is one thing. I mean, that remains, a bit of a question mark for, I mean, basically the entire series. And we have that moment with Bradbury at the end, where Bradbury confesses his love, and there looks like there might be a moment there. And then of course, Mitchell pulls away and it all falls apart and Mitchell turns his back on him. But as far as, again, kind of the character of Mitchell keeping some of those things close to the chest, do you think that was a way for Vaughn to not have the book itself like take as strong of a stance? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And it's sort of an interesting question because, and it even gets into this where it's like, where even his staffers, like he's talking about how he doesn't want to talk about his sexuality. And he's like, well, any politician who doesn't want to talk about their sexuality, everyone assumes is gay. And yeah, like it was interesting that Vaughn kind of chose that to cover up. Because a lot of politicians will say like, what does it matter? Like it's not my job to the death penalty was another good example where
Right.
he gets onto this radio show and the radio host is kind of like needling him in a stance and he's like, what does it matter? Like I don't legislate on that. I have no influence over the death penalty. I can't change it one way or the other. What does it matter? um you can kind of make the argument that it does matter. It's important to know whether or not you think people should be summarily executed for crimes. The death penalty is a very complicated issue. Like if someone is going to be in charge of us, we should probably know where they stand on it. But again, at the same time, like if they have no influence on it, doesn't matter for their day-to-day job. Like doesn't matter for the mayor to, make policy on like real estate taxes and like the MTA and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess that's a really interesting question that I don't really have a good answer to of like what Vaughn's reasoning was for holding those things back. Because it also then kind of he does reveal things like again with the marijuana smoking, where it's like you've got this sort of ongoing flashback of him tracking down like this dealer, who's basically a low level dealer who at one point says like, "Man, I just sell some pot," and like you're chasing me across the city for this. And then at the very end of the arc, like Mitch is lighting a joint because it kind of like helps him relax.
Mm-hmm.
And now, granted, at this point, he's evolved on the issue and he wants to legalize marijuana, even though he doesn't have that power. But it also shows like a degree of hypocrisy where like, sure, he evolved, but like he also once like killed himself to like nearly killed himself to bring like a low level dealer to justice, and meanwhile is like happy to smoke pot on his own, and maybe is like trying to like apologize for his past mistakes by legalizing it. So yeah, no, it's interesting what Vaughan chooses to show and not show and not show, and like what that says about Mitchell, and the questions that it leaves you with about him.
Right. Yeah. Were there, and you know, with the pot dealer, you know, and we find out he ends up, you know, getting stabbed trying to break up a prison fight and dies, and his mother lights herself on fire and kills herself in a protest on the steps of City Hall. So it's like, yeah, you really had, you know, yeah, Mitchell almost killing himself and this guy in the pursuit of him initially, and then, you know, these really sad, you know, tragic consequences after the fact. So yeah, it really. It really does get into some complicated questions, and I think explores them in a meaningful way. It gives you as a reader a lot to, you know, to kind of chew on. Were there any issues that, because honestly, in 50 issues, I feel like he really covered a lot. Were there any issues that you were like, oh, like, I'm surprised that they didn't get into that, or I really would have loved to see Vaughn's take or Mitchell's take on X?
You know, I'm not so sure. I feel like, I mean, New York's a city. It's like a gift that keeps on giving from a storytelling perspective, you know. But I like that he was sort of dealing with this kind of finite term, you know, and Mitchell at one point saying like, you know, I want to concentrate on my job, not being reelected, and I'm just gonna like serve out my term, and then my deputy mayor, you know, you should take him in next. So I kind of like that sort of self-contained nature of it, and because this is the kind of thing you could have drawn out over, you know, a mayor can run for a second term. It could have been an 8-year story, and it could have gone deeper and deeper and deeper into these weird little intricacies of like being the mayor of New York City. But yeah, no, I mean, I could sit here all day and talk about like, oh, cool. It'd be more cool to like see like some of the fundraising aspects and see some of the real estate lobby. But then that's like the government nerd in me, like getting way too intense about it. I think in terms of telling like just sort of like a complete story, I think Vaughn did a pretty good job, and that was the fun thing about revisiting it and like reading it within a couple of days, where it was like, oh yeah, like sometimes it's fun to just sit down and like read something from beginning to end like in comic books, because like, I mean, you know, we can do that with novels all the time, but I think with comics we're a little bit more used to stories that just go on forever. um and so it's nice to kind of feel like, okay, finite start point, finite end point, and you know, and that was fun while it lasted.
Yeah, that's something that, I mean, with creator-owned comics in general, but especially with Vaughn stuff, I always appreciated that he built towards an ending, and that these were, you know, really. And it seems in, you know, whether it's Y or this book or, you know, Paper Girls or Saga, it's like he has, you know, he has his game plan. And I do appreciate that. And I think it gives the book some momentum, like, you know, you're building towards something. And, you know, I mean, 50 plus issues is not a short run, right? So it's definitely, you know, enough. But at the same time,
Yeah,
it's like you feel, you know, you feel satisfied and you've had a complete story. And, you know, from
yeah,
the first issue, right? Like we open, we know, you know, we're sitting with Mitchell in the future, at some point down the line, and we know things don't go great. Like, so there's this very ominous cloud like hanging over the book from the very beginning, and you know you're building to it, and then, you know, finally in that last issue we finally get to the point of Vice.
yeah.
Yeah. I know, you know, we've obviously touched on a number of characters, but, you know, there are a number of key players right throughout the book, in addition to Mitchell himself. You know, of course, we talked about Kremlin and Bradbury, his two first allies, and of course, things sour with Kremlin and ultimately with Bradbury as well, though the latter is with him for, you know, almost the entire series as his, you know, top security guy. Any other dynamics, characters that you wanted to talk about that really stood out or resonated?
I liked Deputy Mayor Wiley a lot, because I thought that Vaughn did a lot of really smart thing in terms of like addressing race issues. You know, which granted, on one hand, like he's like the main character is a white guy, Vaughn's a white guy, Tony Harris is a white guy, so they're obviously writing from like a white and privileged perspective. But I think that they a lot of the conversations that were happening there about like, you know, where Wiley had come from, and his level of effectiveness, and his potential as like a mayor of New York, you know, were pretty smart and pretty well handled. And the book does deal with race issues as it goes on, which is, you know, impossible to not deal with in a city like New York, in a story set in New York. So yeah, no, I that's something I would have liked to see more of, is more of him, because whenever he was around, I was always really interested. And also Candy, the chief of staff, because she was
Mhm.
pretty hardcore, and it was an interesting dynamic that she was sort of like she was much more to the right. Like she was like a right to lifer, and she was. It was almost like they like her and Wiley were sort of like the political opposites. Like and Mitchell was like just a little bit like down the center of the two of them.
Yeah. Yeah, they were, and that's the thing. I mean, everyone everyone was so fully realized. I mean, they really felt like people, not characters, on a comic book page. A
Yeah.
testament to both the writing and the art. Yeah, though. I mean, honestly, I really enjoyed the entire supporting cast. I enjoyed, maybe as a lawyer, Ray, his attorney and his friend from childhood, and also the who looked just like Clark Kent, by the way.
He did, right? Okay, so
Yeah,
it wasn't just me.
yeah. I had that same thought too. I'm like, am I just like seeing this? But I'm like, no, I
Yeah,
think there was.
it was very clear.
And the priest, and as someone who was raised Catholic, the friendship with the priest, and the boxing priest, no less, and the trip to the Vatican, all of that is very, very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, no, and again, like another testament to what Vaughn does is he makes like fully realized side characters who might only show up for like a few pages or just like pop in every now and again, but like you get their gist, you get why they're important. They have a unique and distinctive voice. Like, yeah, like the boxing priest, like he was fantastic. And I say this as someone who like fights a little bit and was raised Catholic. Like it's just sort of like it's an interesting dynamic. And he came in when it was important. And yeah, no, yeah, the series is just rich with like really good little side characters and side jams.
Yeah. Yeah, it really fleshes out this world, I think, in a really effective way. And, actually, though, with the priest, it's funny because, we talked about how there are other instances with certain issues where Mitchell, kind of holds things back. But, the priest asks him, do you believe in God? And he actually gives, it seems like a genuine answer, right? Where,
Yeah,
yeah, where he talks about basically, I'm not remembering the all the specifics of it, but basically, like, he is not an atheist, but doesn't believe that there's a guy sitting up there, with a white beard, but believes that there's some kind of force that kind of, started everything, right? Was that the general gist of
yeah,
it?
yeah, essentially.
So I thought that was interesting. And yeah, the trip to the Vatican, with the the priest who wanted to perform an exorcism on
Yeah,
Mitchell.
yeah,
Yeah. So, well, I
yeah,
guess that's the thing, right? Like, and hey, it is really interesting because, he gets powers, right? So to Kremlin and Bradbury, it's like, you'd be a superhero. To a priest, maybe it's like, this guy's got the devil in him. It's like, really, as a matter of perspective, people can project, different things.
yeah. And then the police commissioner is like, well, you are a threat, and you're a
Yeah.
buffoon and a Looney Tune, and I have to keep an eye on you. Which again, that was another fun dynamic with the woman who was the police commissioner, and like how she has to handle this guy who like used to be a superhero and used to be sort of like their public enemy number one for a little while, who is now her boss. And I just love that scene where like, because she had promised him like, if you ever get back in costume, I'm going to take you down. And then like he has to get back in costume for something, and all the cops pop out with bows and arrows, which is like the what, like because he can talk to guns, he can tell them to not fire, but like a bow and arrow he's got nothing on. And yeah, and it's like, yep, you had this plan the whole time.
Yeah. She was, yeah, that's the thing. Like, she was ready for him. She was
Yeah,
definitely ready
yeah.
for him. So listen, we've been chatting for a little bit over an hour. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet? Anything that you wanted to hit on?
I don't know, man. We covered a lot. Yeah, it was just it made me want to sort of like I'm trying to find my Saga comics now, because I'm like, maybe I'm just going to read some Vaughn for a little while. Because I revisited Why the Last Man within like the last year, and but Saga I feel like is due a reread, and I know they went on hiatus, so like I'm trying to figure out like when they're coming back. But yeah, no, like I also like I haven't sat down and just like dug through comics in a little while. I've been reading like a lot of like research stuff and a lot of like homework reading. So it's like a series like this is just great, man, because it just reminds me of like why I really dig reading comic books and why I like getting lost in them. So yeah, no, it's just it was fun to just sort of like jam out a bit on this and kind of go back through them. And it's super cool that like you were, you had read some of it, but now you were reading it for the first time. So it's like getting those differing perspectives and yeah.
Yeah, it was. I gotta say, like, I genuinely enjoyed this, and like I said, I still have some mixed feelings about the ending. Not quite sure what the full intention of it was. I mean, and for anyone listening who's like, what's the final conclusion here? It's like I don't know. I think it's kind of up to the reader, and I agree with you. I mean, I genuinely believe like Vaughan laid it out the way he did. You can interpret it, I think, in different ways. I do think we do see very clearly, right, that Mitchell has done things that you didn't necessarily think he was capable of or didn't think he had done. And then you find out that he did in terms of rigging the election. Again, the way he turns his back on Bradbury and executes Kremlin. I mean, these are huge, huge turns for the character. But again, I do think they kind of track. And so what the ultimate motivation was, right? We were not debating with each other, but debating this question of like whether this was kind of always within him or the power brought it out. Yeah, I don't know. And I think, for anyone listening to this, it's like, I encourage them to reread it and they might pick up something different. I think that is really one of the great things about just like a political issue, right? Like you can examine it from different sides and people are going to have different perspectives. I think probably something similar here with this character in this series.
Yeah. This is definitely one of those ones that's like there's no clear moral landing point. Like it's a very good sort of, you're going to get out of it what you go into it with, which is sometimes like the best kind of storytelling.
Right. And and again, I'll let you go. I don't want to, but I don't. I mean, I really think someone might read this. I mean, again, I think a number of Mitchell's choices are hard to justify, but at the same time, if you think, based on the way he handled the various issues that popped up throughout the run, that he handled them in the right way, and he really does have the public's best interest at heart, and he's the one for this job. You could make an ends justify the means argument. With Kremlin, not that Kremlin, quote unquote, deserved what he got in the end, but he basically was a thorn in Mitchell's side and caused a lot of trouble for him. Again,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think you can, I don't know, someone might read this and be like, he's the hero of the story. I don't know. I think it's definitely not that cut and dry. And I think the final issue even lays that out so much. Like there are no happy endings, right? I think is sort of the our starting point in that issue. It's just happy pauses, right? And even this, like we see him as vice president, but we don't know what happens after that. So I think
exactly.
There's a lot I think for the reader to do, which is good. And I agree with you. I think it lends itself well to rereads.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right. I promise this is the last thing, because this did pop into my head and I wanted to ask you this. As a lifelong New Yorker, and especially, living through 9/11 and everything. So we have in this series a New York where one tower was saved. Were there, and the answer just might be no to this. Was there anything in the series that you kind of were like, oh, like that's a little detail that, it kind of reflects the fact that we're in an altered reality where one tower was saved, right? I mean, obviously one tower going down is still it's still a tragedy, of course. So I think a lot of stuff plays out the way it would otherwise, but was there anything that you were kind of like, oh, like that's a little bit different than I remember or that I would expect, but maybe that's because of this, alteration?
That's interesting. Because I'm always really, like hyper aware of stories that are set in New York and like whether or not they're accurate. And because I always get pissed off when I'm watching like a movie and someone's like pulling up to a bar and they get a parking spot right out front. It's like, oh, like because the reality is you would have to drive around for 45 minutes, and also why would you have your car in the first place? It's Manhattan. But I think Vaughn got a lot. Like he wrote a very authentic New York. And the thing that really kind of stuck out to me, and I wonder if it's true and if it would have happened, is like and it was obviously Vaughan, like this was Vaughan coming through, like, you know, because Mitchell's whole thing is like he's a civil engineer. He thought the World Trade Center was like kind of ugly because like they were just two giant popsicle sticks, and you know, but his thing is like, okay, they knocked them down, we put them back up the same way they were, you know, and we say like, you know, you can't you can't change the iconic landscape of New York City. We're just going to put it back. And so I wonder if like only one tower had been knocked down, if we would have just, you know, built back the other one the same instead of, you know, the goofy Freedom Tower that we put up in the place of the two. So that's something that kind of fascinates me, is like how that rebuilding process would have changed if one of the buildings were still there. And I kind of wonder, like, while it was clearly Vaughan making a personal statement, I wonder if it was more right than it was wrong.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is a good question. Yeah, that would probably stand out to me as well. There wasn't, because as I was going, I was kind of had that in the back of my head, and there wasn't anything else particularly. But yeah, I just figured I would pick your brain about that. Well, listen, this really was a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking the time to do the reread. You know, again, I mean, maybe especially as a novelist and someone who reads a lot. I mean, 50 comics might not be a big deal, but it was still not a small reading project. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate your time, and it was really great to get your insight as a fan of Vaughan and as a New Yorker and as someone who, you know, worked in city government. I mean, it was really great to get that perspective.
Yeah, this was definitely my sweet spot. And again, thank you so much for having me on. You know, I'm totally down to do it again sometime if you want. Just like pick a different series and I'll go to town on it. Because, yeah, man, like talking about comic books is fun.
Right? Yeah, that's what, you know, I say this on pretty much all of these episodes, but I do this because it does motivate me to finally read the stuff that's been on my shelf. And I also find like I enjoy the reading experience. Like I'm engaging with the material more, knowing that I'm going to talk about it, as opposed to if I were to, and it's, I mean, it's perfectly fine to just read for leisure, but I do enjoy it more reading, knowing that I'm going to be talking about it.
Yeah, because you don't want to sound dumb. which was how I felt the entire time I was rereading these. I'm like, pay attention. I don't want to sound dumb when I'm talking about this.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, with this in particular, I know there's a lot going on and a lot to track. But again, thank you very much. I hope everyone checks out Rob's work. Again, he gave the links earlier, and you know, I'll include it in the description as well. So I really hope that you'll check out Rob's stuff. I will very likely take you up on your offer and invite you back in the future.
Cool. So, rock and roll.
That'll be great. And to our audience, thank you as always for tuning in. We'll be back with a new episode in 2 weeks. And until then, remember, they're all imaginary stories. My Comic Shop Book Club is a Flat Squirrel production. Art by Kristen San Gregorio, music by Basic Printer. If you like what you heard, be sure to check out my other podcasts, Digging for Kryptonite and My Comic Shop History. Sign up for exclusive content, including the official book club companion podcast, at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato, and watch my documentary film, My Comic Shop Country, out now on Apple TV and Amazon.